you is I'm going to talk about a classification of AI in project management. This diagram here, 2x2 diagram, is just a simple way of trying to get your head around the development of products in this space. Across the top there, from a horizontal point of view, going left to right, you've got the amount of humans in the loop, so it sort of plays into the question that we just received. And you know, going from left to right, you've got an increasing amount, or rather a reducing amount of humans within the loop. So in terms of streamlining, that will be adding to existing processes, so bringing processes together, and I'm going to dive into examples of each of these in 1 second. In terms of automation, obviously that's taking the human out of the loop. So again, you know, start thinking about that in terms of project management. For those who are active practitioners of project management, you know, you start thinking about you as a project manager, you know, where in your daily or your weekly life is your administrative burden? You know, typically the answers you would get in there are reporting, communications, logging, repeating the logging of data. Now, if you can start working your way through that and taking that away, if there's adequate return on investment, then I think there's pressure to automate. Similarly, if you then look at this from a horizontal point of view and you start thinking about the intelligence of the computer itself, again, you can move down there in terms of moving from basic computing and basic computer use. I mean, it's not that long ago. I should know this actually. When MS Project went to market in the masses, it's certainly probably 25 years since I've used it. Although personally, for those people that liked it, my sadness is actually liking drawing Gantt charts. That's how I got into project management in the first place. But the point is that there are tools now appearing that are making your life as a project manager or project support professional life easier. Now, in terms of insight and foresight, again, that comes back to predicting outcomes and thinking about which way they're going to go. Now, what we're seeing here is that in terms of systems, the number of systems are predominantly in the top left-hand side there in the streamlining. I mentioned MS Project. I'm going to mention several others in a second. However, automation tools are coming as well and automating elements. You know, gone are those days where the PMO are going to have thousands of administrators in them. Gone are the days where, you know, you write that memo and walk around the corner to deliver it to your friend. So automation is coming. Now, perhaps the most exciting bits are around insight and foresight. And again, there's a real push, certainly from those people in the streamlining space, to try and make their tools cleverer than they ever have been, to give the users of those tools greater insight. So, for example, if I'm running a project and I've got a huge database of all my past projects, perhaps I can start understanding those and using those data points to provide them insight on future projects. Self-directed are basically where the humans no longer in the loop at all, and are likely to take a little bit longer to appear, but they are starting to appear, and certainly start to appear in some people's thoughts. You know, and if it starts with the vision, then I think it carries on. So I'm just going to take a moment just to talk this through in a little bit more detail. So there's some more specific definitions there of streamlining. This research was done within the last year. There were 300 plus project tools. That number is growing every week. So the types of tools, as I'm sure we're all familiar with, are scheduling tools, issue risk management, portfolio management, resource management, team collaboration are obviously tools, you know, whether that be with the bigger players such as MS Project, or the new young guns with your Mondays and those type of products, which are more pointed towards perhaps smaller project environments or digital projects, to coin another phrase. Now, the point is that many organizations use many tools as well, and those tools are often perhaps used separately in different departments, even within one department that uses the same tool as another department, they may be using the tool slightly differently. But also, perhaps those tools may not completely talk to each other, you know, in terms of the workflow of where those tools are used. And that's really where this streamlining comes in, is to drive some efficiency here across the tools. So you know, there's a few little examples there, you know, reminding people of putting your timesheets in if you're in that type of environment, or sprint reminders, or your general status reports, and this whole idea of chatbots, which we're all becoming familiar with on various websites that we visit to do our utility paying, are starting to appear in all sorts of project tools and providing messaging. Now, without being too the harbinger of scariness, but every time that you input that data, obviously that's being recorded, and therefore that data can be reviewed and analysed and based on. So, you know, it's not just being recorded to make suggestions a la Facebook, but it's also being recorded for segmentation purposes and to drive the development of those products, or perhaps give you adverts for whatever you've been talking about that particular week. So that is coming, and that's probably something that we can already see, you know, whether that be versions of new products or versions of products being amalgamated together. So the lines are increasingly becoming blurred between what is a planning tool and what is a portfolio management tool, you know, is an obvious upwards blurring, if you like. Now, in the automation side, again, there are tools starting to appear in this, primarily around bots and chatbots, to perform some of the simpler tasks where they can replace the human being. And you know, back to that same point that I mentioned earlier, they can do it at a much faster rate than a human. You know, you're also getting some examples where there are some tools starting to read some of those messages and starting to self-populate issues. So, you know, perhaps those days where you were hiding that issue from the boss that the project's going to be 3 months late and twice the budget is suddenly going to appear on the PMO's radar, and they're going to start talking about it because they've seen you chatting to your colleagues about it. Now, that may be slightly scarier to just checking data consistency, you know, and data consistency in the project world is an awful problem, you know, and it goes back to one of the biggest challenges here around applying AI to project management is the languages that we use, the data quality needs enhancement. So there are tools that are coming to enhance the data quality as well. So you know, these are coming fairly rapidly, and depending on the size of your projects capability, the amount of investment in automation will increase or decrease. So, for example, you are not going to automate the reporting of a system and invest loads in perhaps a bespoke development as well if you only have a handful of project managers. If you have hundreds of project managers and all of that savings that you make across those projects adds up to whole people, then perhaps there's a business case starting to appear to drive automation. So think about larger projects there. So not just single portfolios of projects, but perhaps those largest projects of them all, those mega projects that we embrace. So there's just another one there, again about productivity. In terms of insight and foresight and self-directed, now I think the point here is those people that are from a computing background will know that expert systems have been around since the 70s, and you know, this is not a new discipline that we're talking about here. You know, a decision tree can be replicated, can be programmatized. And I guess the difference between today and the 70s and 80s is the computing power. You know, the way that we can write computer programs has moved rapidly forward. The speed that we can create computer programs has moved rapidly forward. Now, the problem is, again, this goes back to legacy-wise, if you can imagine if you had created an expert system for what is likely to be a complex problem, the softer side of interpretation was very hard to build into that system. So in other words, it would cost you as much to do the dreaded change requests to the computer system that it costs you to build the system in the first place. Now, the other development that is happening at a rapid rate of knots is machine learning. And this is where the machine is starting to use these statistical techniques. And believe me, guys, the number of statistical techniques is vast, and trying to find the right ones for the appropriate project problem is challenging, and you know, that's where those great brains at the University of Southampton are helping us. So it's not just like, you know, here's a load of data, drop the silver bullet on there and whiz bang pop, there you go, there's your projects that are going to succeed or fail. But the point is that machine learning is coming, and the computer can be learning itself, you know, and the more times it does this, the greater the learning can become. So the challenge then is about the data sets again, as I mentioned, but also the training of the algorithms. And again, that comes back to the ethics that we talked about, you know, not making sure that they are unbiased. So, you know, in case you guys didn't hear it, data is a big challenge in this world. Now, in terms of self-directed, we haven't come across these yet. Now, that's not to say, as I just mentioned, that they aren't being thought about, they aren't being developed in the background. Now, you think about this but from a slightly broader sense. There's a couple of examples there about the autopilots on aeroplanes. We are all fairly comfortable with that premise, and all know that once a plane has perhaps taken off and landed, that the vast majority of the flight is under autopilot. We also know that self-driving cars are coming at a rapid rate of knots, and you know, are being actively tested on our roads, and certainly in some countries are actually free to operate. Now, if you start thinking about that premise and think about the robo-PM, as somebody coined, you start getting the idea of where self-directed may be heading towards. And again, if you start thinking about smaller projects, perhaps, where, you know, go back to your expert system there, where there is a decision tree, you know, is there project budget available for this small work? Has XYZ person approved it? You could start programming that. And perhaps that means that a human might not necessarily need to do that particular task. So, you know, this increased decision making by computers is coming, guys, and it's just a question of when. And we need to work out what that means to us as individuals, but also to us as our organizations. Now, the key here for me is the next evolution in this space will be that moving out of streamlining and pressures into automation and pressures into insight and foresight.